The nightmare always began the same way. Sam Hartwell stood in a field of corpses at Antietam, his hands slick with blood that wasn't his own, watching his brother's face disappear in cannon smoke. 20 years later, he still woke, gasping his scarred leg, throbbing like the phantom pain of a lost limb. But this morning was different. This morning, the screaming from his dreams echoed in the frost-bitten air outside his workshop. Through the cracked window of his makeshift home above Hartwell's tinker shop, Sam watched the mob drag Clara Murphy through Cedar Falls' main street like a sacrificial offering. Her dress, once blue, hung in tatters. Her dark hair matted with mud, and shame covered a face that bore fresh bruises blooming purple against pale skin. The townspeople followed like vultures, their voices a cacophony of righteous fury and ugly excitement. "Show us your shame, Clara." Billy Morrison's voice cut through the morning air. "Show us what you did to your poor stepfather." They shoved her against Sam's storefront, her knees hitting the wooden planks with a sickening crack. She didn't cry out. That silence, that stubborn dignity in the face of humiliation, struck something deep in Sam's chest. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers who lost everything but refused to surrender. The memory hit him like a physical blow. His brother Tommy, barely 18, clutching a Confederate bullet wound and whispering, "Don't let them say I died for nothing, Sam. Don't let them make it meaningless." Sam's hands found his crutch, the worn wood smooth under his palms. His ruined legs screamed as he descended the narrow stairs, but he'd learned to bear pain. What he couldn't bear was the sound of that girl's silence breaking. He stepped into the street, and the mob's roar faltered. Sam Hartwell wasn't a large man, but 20 years of fixing broken things had given him steady hands and steadier eyes. His Civil War uniform hung in his closet, but the soldier's bearing never left his shoulders. "Fun's over now," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd ordered charges into cannon fire. "Get away from my shop." Billy Morrison, drunk on crowd courage and morning whiskey, sneered. "This ain't your business, cripple. Girl's got sins to answer for." Sam limped closer, each step deliberate. "World's full of sinners, Morrison. Question is whether you're man enough to pick on someone who can fight back." The crowd shifted, uncertainty creeping into their bloodlust. Clara Murphy looked up for the first time, her green eyes meeting Sam's brown ones. In that moment, he saw not the broken woman the town had branded her, but something else entirely. Intelligence, determination, and beneath it all, a desperate, drowning hope. "Please," she whispered the word barely audible. "I just need somewhere to rest." Sam extended his hand. "Come on up, miss. Shop's warm." The mob watched in stunned silence as Clara Murphy, the supposed shame of Cedar Falls, took the hand of the town's hermit tinker and disappeared into his workshop. Behind them, Mayor Harrison's face darkened like a gathering storm. Sam's workshop existed in organized chaos. Broken timepieces covered every surface, their gears and springs catching lamplight like metallic constellations. The air smelled of oil leather and the lingering warmth of his forge. Clara Murphy stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, taking in the controlled disorder with eyes that missed nothing. "You fix watches," she said, not a question, but an observation delivered with surprising steadiness. "Fix what I can, scrap what I can't." Sam hung his coat on a peg worn smooth by decades of use. "Tea," she nodded, settling gingerly onto a three-legged stool he'd repaired with leather strapping. Her fingers traced the intricate patterns on a broken pocket watch, and Sam noticed they moved with precision, as if reading the mechanisms through touch alone. "Mainspring's wound too tight," she said suddenly. "That's why it stopped. The gears are fine, but the tension—" She looked up, catching his surprised expression. "My mother taught me, before the fever took her." Sam set the tea before her, studying this woman the town had labeled mad. "What else did she teach you?" Clara's laugh held no humor. "Too much, apparently." Mother believed women should understand more than cooking and sewing. Said knowledge was the only thing no one could steal from you. Her voice dropped. She was wrong. They steal everything else first, then call you crazy for remembering. Through the window, Sam could see knots of townspeople lingering their conversations, animated and angry. Mayor Harrison stood with Sheriff Polk and Dr. Bradshaw, their heads bent in conspiratorial discussion. A chill ran down Sam's spine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "Tell me about Harold Wickham," Sam said quietly. Clara's teacup rattled against the saucer. For a moment her composure cracked, revealing something raw and wounded beneath. "He was my stepfather. Mother married him when I was 15. After she died." She stopped, her knuckles white against the cup's handle. "After she died, he said I owed him. For taking care of Mother during her illness. For keeping me fed and housed." Her voice became mechanical, distant. He had specific ideas about payment. Sam's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough war to recognize that particular kind of damage. "Where is he now?" "Gone. I made sure of that." Clara set down her cup with deliberate care. "The town believes I seduced him, drove him away with my wanton behavior. It's easier than admitting they all knew what he was and did nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them, sharp and authoritative. Through the frosted glass, Sam could make out 3 figures, and the mayor's rounded silhouette, the sheriff's tall frame, and Dr. Bradshaw's distinctive walking stick. "Upstairs," Sam murmured to Clara. "Quickly." She moved with surprising grace. For someone who'd been dragged through the streets, her feet silent on the wooden stairs. Sam opened the door just as Mayor Harrison raised his fist to knock again. "Gentlemen." Sam's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Mayor Harrison's face was flushed, whether from cold or anger, Sam couldn't tell. "Sam, we need to discuss this situation. The girl can't stay here." "What girl?" Dr. Bradshaw stepped forward. His medical bag clutched in one hand, his walking stick in the other. "Clara Murphy is clearly disturbed, Samuel. She needs proper medical attention, not enabling from well-meaning but misguided citizens." Sam studied the doctor's face, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes didn't quite meet Sam's. "Disturbed how?" "Delusions. Hysteria. She's been making wild accusations against a respected member of our community." Sheriff Polk's hand rested on his gun belt, not quite threatening, but clearly visible. "We can't have that kind of instability spreading." From upstairs came the faint sound of footsteps, and Sam saw the 3 men exchange glances. He stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking their view of the stairs. "Ma, funny thing about accusations," Sam said conversationally. "True ones tend to make folks awful nervous." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mayor Harrison's face darkened. "Be very careful, Sam. This town has been good to you. Don't forget that. Good to me." Sam's laugh was bitter. 20 years I've lived here fixing everyone's broken things, keeping to myself. Only time anyone notices me is when they need something mended, or when they want to use my war record to make themselves feel patriotic." Dr. Bradshaw cleared his throat. "Samuel, you're obviously still dealing with your own difficulties. The war affected many men's judgment. Perhaps you're not thinking clearly about this situation." The insult hung in the air, like gunpowder smoke. Sam felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had before, ordering his unit into impossible battles. "My thinking's just fine, Doctor. Clear enough to recognize a lynching when I see one." Sheriff Polk's hand tightened on his gun. "Nobody's talking about lynching. We're talking about proper medical care for a disturbed woman, in a place like Danvers State Hospital, I suppose." Sam's voice carried the weight of grim knowledge. "Where disturbed women conveniently disappear." The 3 men exchanged another look, this one charged with tension. Mayor Harrison straightened his vest, a gesture Sam recognized as preparation for battle. "Sam, you're harboring a dangerous woman. If you won't see reason, we'll have to take official action." Official action against what? Offering tea to someone who was being mistreated. Sam leaned against the doorframe, his crutch positioned where it could quickly become a weapon if needed. Or is giving shelter to the desperate against the law now. From behind him came Clara's voice, clear and steady. "It's all right, Mr. Hartwell. I'll go with them." Sam turned to see her descending the stairs, her chin raised defiantly. But he also saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of calculation that made him pause. "No need for that, miss," he said carefully. "These gentlemen were just leaving." Dr. Bradshaw stepped forward eagerly. "Clara, dear girl, we only want to help you. These episodes you've been having..." "Episodes?" Clara's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you call it when a woman refuses to be silent about abuse?" The room fell silent. Even the ticking of Sam's clock seemed to pause. Clara stepped closer to the three men, and Sam noticed something he'd missed before. She wasn't just angry. She was utterly, brilliantly furious, and beneath that fury lay the sharp edge of intelligence that these men had vastly underestimated. "Dr. Bradshaw," she said conversationally, "that tremor in your left hand suggests early-stage mercury poisoning. Occupational hazard of dentistry, I believe. You might want to reconsider your amalgam procedures." The doctor's face went white. "How could you possibly?" "Sheriff Polk, that limp you're trying to hide indicates a poorly set bone. Probably from a riding accident you were too proud to treat properly. It's affecting your draw speed." Clara's tone remained pleasant, almost chatty. "And Mayor Harrison, that particular shade of yellow around your eyes suggests liver problems. Perhaps you should moderate your evening constitutional at Murphy's saloon." The three men stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and growing anger. Clara smiled, the expression transforming her battered features into something almost radiant. "My mother taught me to observe gentlemen, to see what others miss. Harold Wickham made the mistake of thinking I was just another victim. You're making the same error." Mayor Harrison found his voice first. "This proves she's dangerous, unstable. Sheriff, arrest her." But Sheriff Polk hesitated, his hand hovering over his gun. Sam saw the uncertainty in the man's eyes, the dawning realization that Clara Murphy was not the broken victim they'd expected to find. "On what charge?" Sam asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Finally, Dr. Bradshaw cleared his throat. "This isn't over, Samuel. The girl needs help whether she admits it or not." After the three men left, Sam and Clara stood in the sudden quiet of the workshop. Outside, voices rose and fell as news of the confrontation spread through the town like wildfire. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Sam said finally. Clara sank onto the stool, her moment of fierce confidence fading into exhaustion. "Probably both. But I'm tired of being afraid." Sam nodded, understanding that sentiment better than she knew. Outside, Cedar Falls was awakening to the reality that the broken girl they'd tried to crush might not be broken after all, and that he suspected was going to make things very dangerous indeed. The attack came at sunset, when the workshop's windows glowed amber and the streets lay shrouded in purple shadows. Sam was showing Clara how to adjust the tension springs in a pocket watch, when the first rock shattered his front window, sending glass shards cascading across his workbench like deadly stars. "Get the whore." Billy Morrison's voice split the evening air, thick with alcohol and mob courage. "Drag her out." Sam grabbed his army rifle from behind the counter, the weight familiar in his hands, despite 20 years of peace. "Upstairs?" he barked to Clara. "Lock the door." But Clara didn't move. Instead, she picked up a heavy wrench from the workbench, testing its weight with the same careful precision she'd used on the watch springs. "I'm done running." The front door exploded inward as 6 men charged through, led by Billy Morrison and his brothers Jake and Pete. They carried torches, and fury, their faces twisted with righteous anger and something uglier beneath. "Evening, gentlemen," Sam said calmly, his rifle trained on Billy's chest. "Shop's closed." Billy laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "We ain't here for your fixing, cripple. We're here for her." He pointed at Clara with the burning end of his torch. Time to pay for what she done. And what exactly did she do? Sam's finger found the trigger muscle memory from 100 battlefields, keeping his aim steady despite the tremor of age and old wounds. Seduced a good man, drove him from his home with her wicked ways. Jake Morrison spat on Sam's floor, his eyes never leaving Clara. Town's got standards. Clara stepped forward, the wrench gleaming in the torchlight. Harold Wickham was many things, but good wasn't one of them. Lying whore, Pete Morrison lunged forward, only to stop when Sam's rifle swung toward him with practiced precision. "Next man who moves gets to meet his maker," Sam said quietly. "I've sent better men than you to that particular appointment." The mob hesitated, but Sam could see the calculation in their eyes. 6 against 1 crippled veteran and a woman. The odds seemed to favor them, especially with the righteousness of their cause burning in their chests like liquid fire. Billy Morrison smiled, the expression cold and predatory. "You can't watch all of us, old man, and we got all night." That's when Clara Murphy did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She laughed. The sound was clear and bright, cutting through the tension like a silver bell. "All night, Billy Morrison, you haven't lasted all night at anything in your life," asked Sarah Jenkins. Billy's face flushed red, his torch wavering. "You shut your mouth, or what you'll do to me, what you did to that Indian girl last summer, the one who disappeared after you and your brothers got done with her." Clara's voice carried across the room like a whip crack. "The one Sheriff Polk said ran away." The workshop fell silent, except for the crackle of torches and the distant sound of more voices gathering in the street. Clara had just spoken the unspeakable name, the crime that everyone in Cedar Falls knew about, but no one acknowledged. "You don't know nothing about that." Jake Morrison snarled, but his voice carried a tremor of fear. "I know she was 14. I know she was pregnant. And I know her body's buried in the old mine shaft east of town." Clara stepped closer to the men, fearless now in her fury. "I also know that Dr. Bradshaw helped cover it up, and that Mayor Harrison paid her father to keep quiet." The accusations hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Sam saw the truth of it in the men's faces, in the way they suddenly wouldn't meet each other's eyes. Cedar Falls, it seemed, had more secrets than just Harold Wickham's crimes. Billy Morrison raised his torch higher, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "Lying bitch, you're making it all up." "Am I? Then why don't we ask Anna Running Wolf's father what really happened to her?" The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Anna Running Wolf. The Lakota girl who'd worked at the Morrison Ranch. The girl who'd vanished one night and was never seen again. The girl whose disappearance had been explained away with whispers about wild Indians and their unreliable nature. Sam felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Clara Murphy wasn't just a victim of Harold Wickham's abuse. She was a witness to something much larger, a pattern of violence and corruption that reached into the heart of Cedar Falls's respectable society, and that he realized with growing dread made her the most dangerous woman in the territory. Billy Morrison's torch wavered as he looked around at his companions, seeing the same realization dawning in their eyes. They'd come here to silence a madwoman. Instead, they'd found someone who knew their darkest secrets. "Kill them both," he whispered. "Kill them both and burn this place down." The mob surged forward as one torches raised and murder in their hearts. Sam's rifle cracked, once dropping Jake Morrison with a bullet through the shoulder, but then they were on him, overwhelming his position through sheer numbers. Clara's wrench caught Pete Morrison across the temple, sending him crashing into a workbench. But Billy grabbed her from behind his arm, crushing against her throat. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, the sweat and violence that clung to him like a second skin. "Should have kept your mouth shut, whore." he hissed in her ear. Should have taken what was coming and stayed quiet. Clara drove her elbow back into his ribs, breaking free as he doubled over. She spun the wrench still in her hand, and for a moment the two of them faced each other across the chaos of the burning workshop. "I'm done staying quiet," she said, and brought the wrench down. Billy Morrison crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath his head. Around them, the workshop blazed with scattered torches and spilled lamp oil. Sam struggled to his feet, his bad legs screaming, his rifle lost somewhere in the melee. "We need to go," he gasped. "Now." Clara looked down at Billy Morrison's still form and then at the blood on her hands. For a moment, Sam thought she might freeze, overwhelmed by what she'd done. Instead, she dropped the wrench and grabbed his arm. "The back door," she said firmly, "before the whole place goes up." They stumbled through the smoke and flame, Sam's tools and clocks burning around them, like the funeral pyre of his old life. Behind them, the surviving Morrison brothers shouted for help, and their voices mixing with the roar of the growing fire. In the alley behind his shop, Sam paused to look back at 20 years of careful solitude going up in flames. Everything he'd built since the war, every small comfort he'd carved from the wreckage of his past, was turning to ash and smoke. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "This is all my fault." Sam looked at her, this woman who'd stood her ground against 6 armed men, who'd spoken truth in the face of death, who'd saved his life with her courage and her wrench. "No," he said quietly. "This is what happens when good people finally stop being silent." In the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the town's fire brigade to action. But Sam and Clara were already moving into the darkness beyond Cedar Falls, leaving behind the flames and the secrets that had finally burned their way into the open. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack, 10 miles east of town, its walls weathered silver by wind and time. Sam's leg had given out completely 3 miles back, and Clara had half carried him the rest of the way, her surprising strength born from years of surviving Harold Wickham's particular brand of cruelty. Inside the shack, she tended to his wounds by lamplight, while he tried not to think about Billy Morrison's blood on her hands. The cut on his forehead had stopped bleeding, but his leg was swollen and purple, where one of the Morrison brothers had kicked it during the fight. "You need a doctor." Clara set her fingers gentle as they probed the damaged muscle. "Not happening. Dr. Bradshaw's already shown where his loyalties lie." Sam gritted his teeth as she wrapped the leg with strips torn from her petticoat. "Besides, I've had worse." Clara settled back on her heels, studying his face in the flickering light. "The war, Antietam, took shrapnel in the leg and watched my little brother die 20 feet away." The words came easier than he'd expected, perhaps because Clara Murphy had already seen the worst of what people could do to each other. Been carrying that weight ever since. "Is that why you helped me guilt over your brother?" Sam considered the question, watching shadows dance across the rough-hewn walls. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching strong people get broken by cowards." Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, their voices rising and falling like the wind through canyon walls. Clara banked the fire and settled against the opposite wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. "What you said about Anna running, Wolf," Sam began. "All true. I saw them that night, the Morrison brothers. They were drunk, celebrating something. Anna was trying to get away." Clara's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was hiding in Harold's barn, escaping one of his moods. I watched them drag her into the woods." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Tell who Sheriff Polk, who takes money from the Morrison family, Mayor Harrison, who owns half the businesses in town, Dr. Bradshaw, who's in everyone's pocket." She shook her head. "Besides, who would believe the word of Harold Wickham's stepdaughter against the town's leading citizens?" Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. How long has this been going on? Years. Maybe since the town was founded. There's always been girls who disappear men who get away with things they shouldn't. The respectable folks just look the other way, as long as it doesn't touch them directly. The fire crackled in the silence that followed sparks rising toward the smoke-stained rafters. Sam thought about his 20 years in Cedar Falls, his deliberate isolation, his refusal to get involved in anyone else's business. Had he been complicit in this through his silence? Had his desire for peace made him an accomplice to evil? "There's more," Clara said quietly. "Harold didn't just abuse me. He was keeping records photographs. Insurance, he called it." Sam's blood turned to ice. Records of what? Everyone. Mayor Harrison's gambling debts, Dr. Bradshaw's illegal surgeries, Sheriff Polk's arrangement with the cattle rustlers, the Morrison brothers and what they did to Anna and others. Clara pulled her knees closer to her chest. Harold documented everything, kept it all in a safe in his study. He used it to buy silence, cooperation protection. Where are those records now? Clara reached into her bodice and pulled out a small brass key. Still in his safe. He never thought a simple girl like me would figure out the combination. Sam stared at the key, understanding flooding through him like cold water. This wasn't just about Harold Wickham's abuse or even the Morrison brothers' crimes. This was about an entire network of corruption that reached into every corner of Cedar Falls's power structure. And Clara Murphy held the key to exposing all of it. "They'll kill us for this," he said simply. "They'll try." Clara tucked the key away, her jaw set with determination. "But I'm not running anymore. Those records represent justice for Anna Runningwolf and every other girl who couldn't fight back." Sam lay back against his saddle, staring up at the ceiling where years of smoke had painted abstract patterns in soot and shadow. Tomorrow, they would have to decide: flee Cedar Falls forever and let the corruption continue, or go back and face certain death to expose the truth. It wasn't really a choice at all. Outside, the coyotes sang their wild songs under a canopy of stars, and Sam Hartwell began planning the most dangerous mission of his life. The next morning brought word that rocked the foundations of everything Sam and Clara thought they knew. Catherine Walsh, the traveling correspondent for the Denver Post, arrived at their hideout with news that changed the entire game. Sam had his rifle trained on her before she cleared the tree line, but something about her approach, hands visible. No weapons drawn, moving slow and deliberate, made him pause. Catherine Walsh was a handsome woman of perhaps 35, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world's ugliness to recognize truth when it stared back at her. "Mr. Hartwell," she called when she was still 20 yards away. "I'm a friend. I have information about Harold Wickham." Clara emerged from the shack, every muscle tense. "How did you find us?" "Followed the smoke trail from your workshop last night. When I heard what happened, I knew you'd head for the hills." Catherine kept her hands where they could see them. "I've been investigating Harold Wickham for 3 months. What I found is going to change everything." Sam lowered his rifle slightly. "Talk." Catherine reached slowly into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather portfolio thick with documents. "Harold Wickham is dead." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She staggered backward, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Dead. Shot in San Francisco 3 days ago. But here's the thing that'll interest you, Miss Murphy. He wasn't killed by vigilantes or angry creditors. He was murdered by federal agents." Sam felt the world tilt on its axis. "Federal agents?" Catherine nodded grimly. Harold Wickham wasn't just keeping records for blackmail. He was selling information to a syndicate of land speculators working to defraud homesteaders across 3 territories. The corruption in Cedar Falls was just one small piece of a much larger operation. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, her face white as winter snow. "He's really dead. Shot trying to escape federal custody. But before he died, he made a confession." Catherine's voice gentled as she looked at Clara. "He admitted to what he did to you, Miss Murphy. All of it. The federal agents have sworn testimony that you were his victim, not his accomplice." For a moment, the only sound was the wind through the pine trees and Clara's ragged breathing. 20 years of shame and fear of being called a liar and a seductress suddenly lifted from her shoulders like a physical weight. But Sam was thinking like a soldier, seeing angles and threats that others might miss. If the federal government is involved, why are you here? Why not official agents? Catherine's expression darkened. Because the corruption runs deeper than anyone imagined. There are federal judges, territorial governors, even congressmen involved in this land fraud scheme. The agents who killed Wickham were working outside official channels. Vigilantes with badges, Sam muttered. Something like that. And they're coming here to Cedar Falls to clean up loose ends. Catherine looked between Sam and Clara, her meaning clear. Your loose ends. Clara struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady. But Harold's dead. His confession clears me. His confession also implicates everyone he was blackmailing. Mayor Harrison, Dr. Bradshaw, Sheriff Polk, the Morrison family, they're all part of a network that stretches from here to Washington, D.C. Catherine opened her portfolio, revealing photographs and documents. These people have too much to lose to let witnesses survive. Sam studied the documents, his soldier's mind cataloging threats and calculating odds. How long do we have? The federal cleanup crew left Denver yesterday. They'll be here by tonight, maybe sooner. Catherine closed the portfolio with a snap. There's a train leaving for Chicago in 4 hours. I can get you both on it. Clara shook her head violently. No, I'm not running. Not when I finally have proof of Harold's crimes. Miss Murphy, these aren't local bullies or corrupt sheriffs. These are professional killers with federal authority. They'll make you disappear, and no one will ever ask questions. Then what about Anna Running Wolf? What about all the other girls who suffered while good people stayed silent? Clara's voice rose, crackling with fury and pain. Harold's records are still in that safe. Those records could bring justice to dozens of victims. Catherine and Sam exchanged a look. They both understood what Clara was saying, and they both knew it was probably a death sentence. There might be another way, Catherine said slowly. If we could get those records to the right people, honest federal agent senators who aren't compromised, we might be able to expose the whole network. Sam checked his rifle muscle memory, already calculating ammunition and sight lines. Getting to those records means going back to Cedar Falls, right into the teeth of whatever trap they're setting. Yes, Clara said simply, it does. Catherine stared at her in amazement. You're talking about suicide? No. Clara replied, her voice steady as bedrock. I'm talking about justice. Harold Wickham spent 5 years making me feel powerless, telling me I was worthless, convincing me that no one would ever believe me. She looked at Sam, then at Catherine. Well, now someone believes me. Now I have proof. And I'll be damned if I let them bury the truth along with me. Sam felt something he hadn't experienced since the war. The clarity that comes before a suicide charge, the peace of knowing you're about to do something absolutely right and absolutely deadly. All right, he said quietly. Let's go get those records. Catherine shook her head in disbelief. You're both insane. Probably, Clara agreed. But we're insane with a purpose. As they prepared to ride back to Cedar Falls, Sam found himself thinking about his brother Tommy, dying in the smoke and chaos of Antietam. Tommy had always believed that some things were worth dying for. Maybe it had taken Sam 20 years to find something he believed in that strongly. Maybe it was worth it. They reached the outskirts of Cedar Falls. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood and gold. The town looked different somehow, quieter and more ominous, as if it were holding its breath for what was coming. Catherine had positioned herself with a view of the main street, her camera and notepad ready to document whatever happened. Sam and Clara approached Harold Wickham's house from the rear, using the network of alleys and back gardens that Sam had mapped during his 20 years of deliberate isolation. The Wickham house loomed against the darkening sky, like a monument to secrets, its windows dark, and its front door sealed with an official notice of seizure by territorial authorities. But Sam had spent 2 decades fixing broken locks and damaged windows. Getting inside would be the easy part. Staying alive long enough to get back out would be considerably harder. There, Clara whispered, pointing to a cellar window partially concealed by overgrown bushes. Harold never bothered to fix the latch on that one. Sam worked the window open with tools from his pocket muscles, remembering skills learned during the war, when getting into enemy positions had meant the difference between victory and death. The cellar smelled of mold and neglect, with an underlying odor that suggested unpleasant things had happened in its shadows. They made their way upstairs by lamplight, Clara leading the way through rooms that held 5 years of her worst memories. Sam watched her face, seeing the way she flinched at certain doorways, the way her breathing quickened when they passed what must have been Harold's bedroom. "Study's at the end of the hall," she murmured. "The safe is behind a false panel next to the fireplace." The study was a shrine to Harold Wickham's paranoia and greed. Maps covered the walls marked with property boundaries and mineral rights. Ledger books filled shelves, their pages documenting transactions that would probably hang half the territory's political establishment. And behind the false panel, exactly where Clara had said it would be, sat a massive steel safe with Harold Wickham's secrets locked inside. Clara knelt before the safe, her fingers steady as she worked the combination. Mother's birthday. Then the year Harold bought this house, then the date Anna Running Wolf disappeared. Her voice was flat, clinical. He thought he was being clever. The safe opened with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and correspondence that represented decades of carefully documented evil. Clara began pulling files out systematically, her movements quick and efficient. "Dear God." Sam breathed, looking at a photograph of Mayor Harrison accepting money from a man in federal uniform. "This goes all the way to the top." "Well, higher," Clara said grimly, pulling out a folder marked with territorial seal. Harold was keeping records on everyone, federal agents included. Insurance, he called it. That's when they heard the horses. Sam moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 8 riders had positioned themselves around the house, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't local vigilantes or corrupt sheriffs. These were the federal cleanup crew Catherine had warned them about. "Company," he said quietly. Clara stuffed the most important documents into a leather satchel, her hands moving with desperate efficiency. Almost done. The front door exploded inward with the sound of splintering wood and shouted commands. Heavy boots thundered through the house, moving with military precision toward the study. "Federal agents," a voice boomed. "Come out with your hands visible." Sam positioned himself beside the study door, his rifle ready. "Back window?" Clara looked, then shook her head. 2 men in the garden. They've got us surrounded. The footsteps stopped outside the study door. Sam could hear whispered conversations, tactical discussions about angles and crossfire. These men knew their business. Miss Murphy. The voice was cultured, educated, with just a hint of Southern accent. "My name is Special Agent Davis. We're here to help you." Clara's laugh was bitter. "Help me the same way you helped Harold." A pause. Then, Harold Wickham was a criminal and a traitor. His death was justice served. You, however, are an innocent victim. We're prepared to offer you protection in exchange for any documents he may have left behind. Sam caught Clara's eye and shook his head slightly. The agent's tone was too smooth, too rehearsed. This was the voice of a man who'd made similar offers to other inconvenient witnesses. "What kind of protection?" Clara called back, buying time. "Relocation, new identity, enough money to start a new life somewhere far from all this unpleasantness." "And if I refuse?" Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Murphy, you've already killed 1 man. Billy Morrison died from his injuries this morning. That makes you a fugitive from justice. Cooperation is really your only option. Clara's face went white. Billy Morrison was dead. That changed everything, made her a wanted killer instead of just an inconvenient witness. Sam saw the moment she made her decision. Her chin came up, her jaw set with the same determination he'd seen when she faced down the Morrison brothers. "Agent Davis, I have a counteroffer." "I'm listening." "Go to hell." The study door exploded inward as federal agents stormed the room. Sam's rifle cracked once, twice, dropping the first two men through the door. Clara dove behind Harold's desk as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass around them. But there were too many of them, and they were too well trained. Within seconds, Sam found himself surrounded, his rifle empty, and his bad leg giving out under him. Clara clutched the satchel of documents to her chest, her eyes defiant, even as Agent Davis pressed his pistol to her temple. "Drop the bag, Miss Murphy." Clara looked at Sam, at the blood spreading across his shirt from where a bullet had found its mark. She looked at the broken window, where Catherine Walsh was probably watching through her camera lens, documenting the end of their desperate mission. And then she smiled. "No," she said simply. Agent Davis's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, Agent Davis." Clara said conversationally, "Do you know what Harold Wickham's greatest mistake was?" The agent hesitated, confused by her calm tone. "He underestimated me. Just like you're doing right now." Clara pulled something from her bodice, not the safe key, but a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "Nitroglycerin. Harold used it for mining claims. One wrong move and this whole room goes up." The federal agents froze their weapons, suddenly feeling very heavy in their hands. Agent Davis's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "M.I. Harold taught me many things about chemistry during our time together. How to make explosives, how to make poisons, how to make men disappear without a trace." Clara's voice carried the ring of absolute truth. "The only question is whether you're willing to bet your life that I'm lying." In the silence that followed, the distant sound of more horses could be heard approaching the house. But these weren't federal agents. These were the sounds of Catherine Walsh's backup plan, honest lawmen from Denver, brought by her telegraph messages and sworn testimony. Agent Davis realized his situation was rapidly deteriorating. "Stand down," he shouted to his men. "Everyone out now." As the federal agents retreated, Clara carefully placed the vial back in her bodice. Sam stared at her in amazement. "Please tell me that wasn't actually nitroglycerin," he said weakly. Clara's smile was radiant. "Lamp oil and soap." Harold's chemistry lessons were rather limited. Outside, the sound of gunfire erupted as Agent Davis's corrupt federal agents met Catherine Walsh's honest federal marshals. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived in Cedar Falls. The trials that followed made headlines across 3 territories. Catherine Walsh's investigative reporting, combined with Harold Wickham's meticulously documented evidence, exposed a corruption network that reached from local sheriffs to territorial governors to federal judges in Washington, D.C. Mayor Harrison hanged himself in his jail cell rather than face trial. Dr. Bradshaw fled to Mexico but was eventually extradited and sentenced to life in prison. Sheriff Polk turned state's evidence and disappeared into witness protection. The surviving Morrison brothers received death sentences for the murder of Anna Runningwolf and at least 6 other young women. And Clara Murphy, the broken girl who'd been dragged through Cedar Falls streets like a sacrifice to their collective guilt, became the star witness in the largest corruption trial in territorial history. But that was all legal aftermath and the slow grinding of official justice. What mattered to Sam Hartwell was what happened in the weeks that followed as he recovered from his bullet wound in the Denver hospital, where Clara rarely left his bedside. "Reporters want to interview you," she said one morning, setting a cup of coffee beside his bed. "Catherine says you're becoming something of a folk hero." Sam grimaced. "Folk heroes are for people who live through their stories. I just got lucky. We both did." Clara settled into the chair beside his bed, her hands steady as they'd been when she'd worked on his watches. "I've been thinking about what comes next." "Oh, Catherine's offered me a job with the Denver Post. Investigative reporting focusing on crimes against women and children." Apparently, Harold's records weren't the only ones of their kind. Sam felt something twist in his chest that might have been pride or might have been fear. Dangerous work. Someone has to do it. And I'm apparently very good at getting people to underestimate me. Clara's smile held echoes of the steel that had faced down Agent Davis. "But I can't do it alone. I need a partner. Someone who knows how to fix broken things." "Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me, Sam Hartwell. I'm asking you to help me build something. A place where broken people can find justice, where victims can find their voices." She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "I'm asking you to help me turn all this pain into something useful." Sam looked at her, this woman who'd survived 5 years of Harold Wickham's cruelty and emerged stronger than steel. He thought about his 20 years of isolation, his careful distance from other people's troubles, his conviction that broken things were all he was good for. Maybe that was exactly what the world needed. "What did you have in mind?" Clara's smile lit up the hospital room like sunrise. "A school. The Hartwell Institute for Second Chances. A place where women like Anna Runningwolf can learn to defend themselves. Where men like you can teach them how to fix what's been broken. And you think Denver's ready for something like that? You think Denver's ready for change? The trials proved that corruption can be exposed, that powerful men can be held accountable." Clara stood smoothing her skirts with hands that no longer trembled. "The question is whether you're ready to be part of that change." Sam considered her offer, thinking about Tommy dying at Antietam, about 20 years of fixing other people's broken possessions while his own soul gathered dust. He thought about Billy Morrison's blood on Clara's hands and Agent Davis's gun at her temple, and the moment when she'd chosen justice over safety. He thought about what it meant to finally have something worth fighting for. "Partners?" he asked. "Partners." Clara confirmed, extending her hand. Sam took it, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength that had survived Harold Wickham's worst intentions. "Then let's get started." 3 years later, the Hartwell Institute for Second Chances occupied a full city block in Denver's growing industrial district. What had started as Clara's vision of a school had evolved into something larger, a combination vocational training center, women's shelter, and investigative journalism operation that had attracted attention from across the Western Territories. Sam stood in the main workshop watching Clara demonstrate proper metallurgy techniques to a class of young women who'd arrived at the institute with nothing but bruises and broken dreams. Her hands moved with the same precision she'd shown when working on his watches, but now she was fixing something far more valuable: human lives. "Temperature's everything," she was saying to her students. "Too hot and the metal becomes brittle. Too cold and it won't form properly. But find the right heat, apply the right pressure, and you can reshape anything." Sam smiled, recognizing the metaphor. Clara had never been subtle about her teaching methods. Catherine Walsh appeared at his elbow, her notebook and pencil a permanent part of her anatomy. Another success story. 3rd one this month. Jenny Miller finished her apprenticeship and opened her own shop in Colorado Springs. Sarah Chen got a job with the territorial mining inspector. Maria Santos is working for the federal marshal's office. Sam gestured toward Clara's classroom. All of them came here broken. All of them left stronger. Catherine made notes, her reporter's instincts always cataloging human interest stories. "The Institute's becoming famous, you know. I've had inquiries from women as far away as California and Texas. Clara's been talking about expansion. Maybe satellite schools in other territories." Sam watched his partner guide a student through the delicate process of spring tension adjustment. "She thinks we can change how the whole West treats its most vulnerable citizens. And you? What do you think?" Sam considered the question, remembering the broken tinker who'd lived above his shop in Cedar Falls, convinced that isolation was safety, and that broken things were all he'd ever be good for. I think she's probably right. She usually is. A commotion at the Institute's front entrance interrupted their conversation. Sam recognized the voice immediately, Governor Mitchell, whose administration had been swept into power on the wave of anti-corruption sentiment following the Cedar Falls trials. Miss Murphy, Mr. Hartwell. The governor strode into the workshop like a man who owned everything he surveyed. I have a proposition for you. Clara finished her demonstration before turning to face their visitor, her expression carefully neutral. The Institute had learned to be wary of politicians bearing gifts. Governor Mitchell. To what do we owe the pleasure? The territorial legislature is considering a bill to fund similar institutes across the region. Federal backing, official recognition, enough money to expand your operation tenfold. Mitchell's smile was practiced political. All you'd need to do is accept government oversight and modify your curriculum to meet federal standards. Sam and Clara exchanged a look. They'd discussed this possibility many times, the temptation of official funding versus the freedom to operate independently. What kind of modifications? Clara asked carefully. Nothing major. Just focus more on traditional domestic skills, less on mechanical training and investigative techniques. The federal government isn't entirely comfortable with the idea of training women to be, shall we say, quite so independent. The workshop fell silent. Every woman in the room understood exactly what Governor Mitchell was suggesting: government money in exchange for neutering everything that made the Institute effective. Clara walked to her workbench and picked up a piece of steel she'd been shaping, testing its flexibility with expert hands. Governor, this metal has been heated and hammered until it's stronger than when it started. That's what we do here. We don't teach women to be more compliant. We teach them to be stronger. Miss Murphy, I understand your principles, but surely you can see the practical advantages. I see them perfectly. Clara set down the steel and faced the governor with the same unwavering gaze that had once stared down Agent Davis. And I decline your generous offer. Governor Mitchell's political smile flickered. You're making a mistake. Without official support, operations like this rarely survive long term. There are always complications. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Sam stepped beside Clara, his hand resting on the workshop tool that could quickly become a weapon if necessary. Governor, I think this conversation is over. After Mitchell left the workshop, remained unusually quiet. Finally, one of Clara's students, a teenage girl who'd arrived 3 months earlier, bearing knife scars and trust issues, spoke up. Miss Clara, what if he tries to shut us down? Clara smiled, the expression transforming her face into something radiant and fierce. Then we'll do what we've always done, Emma. We'll adapt. We'll survive. And we'll keep fighting. She looked around the room at the faces of women who'd found strength they never knew they possessed, who'd learned to shape metal and minds with equal skill. They can threaten our funding, but they can't threaten what we've built here. They can't threaten what you've become. Sam watched Clara rally her students, seeing in her the same indomitable spirit that had faced down the mob in Cedar Falls. Some people, he realized, were simply too strong to be broken, no matter how hard the world tried. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those people decided to help you become stronger too. The final confrontation came not with government pressure or political maneuvering, but with a knock on Sam's apartment door at 3 a.m. on a cold February night. He opened it to find a young woman, barely out of her teens, her face purple with fresh bruises, clutching a carpet bag that contained everything she owned. "Are you Mr. Hartwell?" she asked through swollen lips. "From the Institute." Sam stepped aside, gesturing her into the warmth of his small parlor. "What's your name?" "Rebecca. Rebecca Willis." She sank into his armchair like a woman who hadn't slept in days. "I walked here from Pueblo. 2 weeks on the road. People told me you helped women like me." Sam poured her tea, noting the way her hands shook when she accepted the cup. Women like you, broken ones. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. My husband, he said I was worthless. Said no one would ever believe me if I told them what he did. Said the law was on his side because wives are supposed to obey. Sam felt the familiar anger rise in his chest, the same fury he'd experienced watching Clara Murphy being dragged through Cedar Falls streets. What changed your mind about leaving? He started talking about our daughter. Rebecca's voice broke. She's only 8 years old, but he said it was time to start her education in wifely duties. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He set down his own cup with careful precision, his hands suddenly unsteady with rage. Where is your daughter now? Still in Pueblo. With him. Tears ran down Rebecca's battered face. I had to leave her behind. He would have killed me if I'd tried to take her. But I can't. I can't leave her there. Not knowing what he'll do to her. Sam studied Rebecca Willis, seeing in her the same desperate courage that had brought Clara Murphy to his workshop door 3 years earlier. What's your husband's name? Deputy Marshal Thomas Willis. He's got the sheriff's office, the mayor, half the territorial government in his pocket. Rebecca's voice carried the hopelessness of someone who'd tried to fight the system and lost. Nobody's going to stand up to him. Not for a woman like me. Sam found himself thinking about impossible battles and necessary wars, about the moment when you stop calculating odds and start fighting for what's right. Rebecca, do you trust me? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much betrayal to trust easily. But something in his face, some echo of his own hard-won battles, made her nod slowly. Then get some rest. Tomorrow we're going to get your daughter back. The next morning, Sam and Clara stood in the Institute's main workshop, surrounded by Rebecca Willis and 23 women who'd graduated from their program over the past 3 years. Each of them had arrived broken and desperate. Each of them had learned to be something more dangerous than their abusers had ever imagined. Clara spread a map of Pueblo across the workbench, her finger tracing streets and buildings with military precision. Deputy Marshal Willis lives here in a house on the outskirts of town. He keeps his daughter locked in the basement during the day while he's at work. Sam studied the tactical situation with a soldier's eye. Security, 2 hired men watching the house. Both of them wanted for assault in other territories. Clara's intelligence network had grown impressive over the years, fed by grateful graduates and sympathetic allies. The local sheriff's in Willis's pocket, but we've got contacts in the federal marshal's office. Emma Sullivan, and the knife-scarred teenager who'd become one of Clara's most accomplished students, leaned forward. Miss Clara, this isn't like the other times. This is a federal marshal we're talking about. If we're caught, we'll face the consequences. Clara's voice carried the authority of someone who'd faced down worse odds. But if we do nothing, an 8-year-old girl will face worse than consequences. She'll face what Rebecca faced, what I faced, what some of you faced. The room fell silent. Every woman present understood exactly what Clara was talking about. They'd all survived similar hells. This is voluntary, Sam said quietly. No one has to participate. This isn't what you signed up for when you came here. Maria Santos, the former victim who now worked for the federal marshals, laughed. Mr. Sam, this is exactly what we signed up for. You taught us to fix broken things. There's nothing more broken than a system that protects monsters and punishes victims. One by one, the women nodded their agreement. These weren't victims anymore. They were warriors trained by necessity and tempered by survival. All right, then, Clara said, rolling up the map. Let's go save Rebecca's daughter. The rescue operation unfolded with the precision of a military campaign and the determination of mothers protecting their own. Sarah Chen created a distraction that drew Deputy Marshal Willis away from his house. Emma Sullivan and 2 other graduates neutralized the guards with techniques learned from Sam's war stories and Clara's practical instruction. And Clara Murphy, the broken girl who'd once been dragged through Cedar Falls streets as a sacrifice to collective guilt, walked into Thomas Willis's basement and gently took the hand of an 8-year-old girl who'd given up hope of rescue. "Hello, sweetheart," Clara said softly. "Your mother sent me. We're going to take you somewhere safe." The little girl, thin and bruised and terrifyingly quiet, looked up at Clara with eyes that had seen too much. "Are you an angel?" Clara felt tears she thought were long exhausted spring to her eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be hurt and scared. But I also know what it's like to be saved." By the time Deputy Marshal Willis returned to find his house empty and his guards unconscious, Clara and her team were already on the train back to Denver. Catherine Walsh's newspaper connections ensured that the story of Willis's crimes reached federal authorities within hours. The deputy marshal was arrested 3 days later, his corruption network exposed by evidence that Maria Santos had carefully gathered through her federal contacts. Rebecca Willis and her daughter disappeared into the Institute's network of safe houses and new identities emerging months later as successful businesswomen in California. And the Hartwell Institute for Second Chances continued its work, fixing broken things and building something stronger from the pieces. 5 years after that cold February night, Sam Hartwell stood in the garden behind the Institute's main building, watching Clara teach her latest class of students how to tend the vegetables that would feed their community through another Colorado winter. The girl who'd once survived on scraps and shame now nurtured both plants and people with equal skill. "Penny for your thoughts," Catherine Walsh said, joining him by the fence that separated the garden from the bustling street beyond. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Sam gestured toward the Institute's expanded buildings, the workshops and classrooms that now occupied 3 city blocks. "When Clara first talked about building something from all that pain, I didn't really believe it was possible. And now I think she was being modest. This is bigger than either of us imagined." Catherine made notes in her ever-present journal. "The federal government is finally taking notice. Senator Morrison, no relation to the Cedar Falls family, introduced legislation this week to fund similar institutes in every territory." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Federal funding? I thought Clara turned that down." "She did. But this is different. This bill specifically prohibits government interference in curriculum or operations. Clara's methods would be protected by federal law." In the garden, Clara looked up from her demonstration on proper soil preparation, catching Sam's eye, and smiling with the warmth that had sustained him through 8 years of partnership. She'd grown into her strength, become the woman that the frightened girl in his workshop had always been meant to be. "She'll probably say yes to the funding this time," Sam mused. "If it means helping more women like Rebecca Willis." "Okay, barrier. What about you? Ready to become a federally recognized educator?" Sam laughed, thinking about the broken tinker he'd been in. Cedar Falls, convinced that his only value lay in fixing other people's discarded possessions. "Catherine, 8 years ago, I thought the best I could do was repair broken watches. Clara taught me that fixing broken people is more important work." As if summoned by his words, Clara finished her lesson and walked over to join them. Her hands were still stained with soil, her face bright with the satisfaction of work well done. "Sam's been telling me about Senator Morrison's bill," Catherine said without preamble. Clara nodded, unsurprised. "I've been expecting something like this. The Institute's success has made people nervous and hopeful in equal measure." "And," Sam asked, "and I think it's time to take the next step." Clara looked out over the garden where her students were practicing the skills that would help them survive and thrive in a hostile world. "We've proven that our methods work. We've saved lives, built futures, created something that didn't exist before. But there are thousands of women out there who still need what we offer. Rebecca Willis and her daughter were just 2 of them." Clara's voice carried the weight of responsibility and possibility. If federal funding means we can reach more of them, then federal funding is what we'll pursue. Sam studied her face, seeing the same determination that had faced down Agent Davis with a vial of lamp oil and bluff. What if the politicians try to change what we do? Water it down, make it safer. Clara's smile held echoes of the steel that had survived Harold Wickham's worst intentions. Then we'll remind them what happened to the last group of powerful men who tried to silence inconvenient women. Catherine laughed, recognizing the threat wrapped in diplomatic language. I'll make sure to include that quote in my article. As the afternoon sun slanted through the garden, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility, Sam found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From a broken tinker's shop in Cedar Falls to a federal program that would change how the entire nation treated its most vulnerable citizens. It had started with one moment of courage, one decision to stand between a mob and their intended victim. Everything else, the investigations, the trials, the institute, the lives they'd saved, and the futures they'd built, had grown from that single act of refusing to look away. Clara, he said quietly, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't come out of my workshop that morning? She considered the question seriously, as she did all things. I think I would have found another way to survive. People like us usually do. She paused, her hand finding his with the unconscious ease of 8 years' partnership. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I'm glad we found each other instead. Even though it led to all this. Sam gestured toward the institute, toward the complexity and responsibility that had grown from their simple desire to help. Especially because it led to all this. Clara's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd found her life's work. Sam, we turned pain into purpose. We built something lasting from something broken. That's not a burden, it's a gift. In the distance, the Denver church bells began to ring, and the evening hour, their bronze voices carrying across a city that had learned to embrace the radical idea that broken things could be made stronger, that discarded people could build something magnificent from the pieces of their shattered lives. And in the garden of the Hartwell Institute for Second Chances, two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances continued the work of proving that redemption wasn't about erasing your scars. It was about daring to turn pain into hope, even when the world called you worthless. It was about believing that broken things could be beautiful, and that sometimes the most important repairs were the ones you made to the human heart. As another group of students arrived at the Institute's front door, women carrying everything they owned in carpet bags and suitcases, their faces bearing the particular exhaustion of people who'd traveled far to find hope. Clara squeezed Sam's hand and walked forward to greet them. Welcome. She said, her voice warm with promise and possibility. You're in exactly the right place. And watching her work, this woman who'd survived the worst that men could do and emerged stronger than steel, Sam Hartwell knew that she was absolutely right. The Hartwell Institute wasn't just a school or a shelter or a symbol of social progress. It was proof that broken things in the right hands could become unbreakable. It was proof that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with guns or laws or political power, but with the simple, radical act of believing that every human being deserved dignity, safety, and the chance to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their past. And in a world that too often measured worth by what could be taken or destroyed, that belief was the most revolutionary force of all. The sun set over Denver, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, and the work continued.